Okay, good morning everyone. Dear Mr. Tishtil from the Directorate General for Migration and Home Affairs, dear Mrs. Kavrakova, Director of ECAS, dear Mr. Georgiev, Chairman of the Board of ProInfo Foundation and the EU Impact Project Leader, dear representatives of several EU institutions, as I think they are present today, and dear all, on behalf of the government of Catalonia, I would like to warmly welcome you to this delegation to the EU. It is really a pleasure for us to host this final conference of the EU Impact Project, 24 years of EU citizenship, what we stand to lose. And I mean, the title says it all already. I would like to thank ECAS in particular for the organization of this conference, which couldn't be more timely. As I already hinted when referring to the title of this conference, it couldn't be more timely considering the current EU agenda. As you all know, it was first enshrined in the Maastricht Treaty in 1992. The EU citizenship was individually conferred to all EU nationals. This entails precious rights for each and every one of us, rights such as non-discrimination, freedom of movement, voting rights, but also diplomatic protection, for instance, and also the relation with the EU institutions in terms of contact, of response, the right to address them, petitions to the European Parliament, complaints to the European Ombudsman, for instance, and so on and so forth. It was only some years later, in 2007, that the Treaty of Lisbon introduced the Citizens' Initiative, which is a new form of participation that allows citizens of different countries to raise concerns about specific questions and invites the European Commission to bring forward initiatives in that sense. So all in all, the EU citizenship was and remains, or should remain, a milestone in the construction process of the European Union. It is a valuable asset that we must absolutely safeguard, and no one should be allowed to undermine it. And in that sense, raising awareness of people's rights and the effective implementation of these rights is of the essence. Just a few words about this place you are here today. This year, Catalonia is marking 30 years of presence in the European Union as part of a Spanish state. But also, we are marking 30 years in Brussels, our physical presence in Brussels, as we opened a first office already in 1986, the year of accession of Spain and Portugal to the European Union. So no wonder that we were enthusiastic in those days, in 1996, and we still are to some extent. For generations of Catalans and Spanish citizens, Europe was an aspirational goal, an aspirational endeavor, as it represented a common space of shared sovereignty, of course, but also a space where democracy, respect of fundamental rights and basic freedoms prevailed. And that was everything that we lacked in Spain for decades of dictatorship. So this accession was a kind of a reward and moving to another level. It was also, of course, a way of embracing modernity, material prosperity, but it was first and foremost, and I want to underline that, a way to reach fundamental goals. And ever since, this presence in Brussels we have worked to promote and defend Catalan interests in Europe, but also to contribute and to project influence in EU affairs. Moreover, we promote awareness among Catalan citizens of the rights and opportunities that the EU offers to them by providing information and facilitating also participation and engagement, and that's very important, with other institutional and non-institutional players in the EU. As you know, Catalonia has a rich and lively civil society, and over the past 6 years, I think it's been quite visible. The mobilization and participation in Catalonia has been really remarkable. I think it has taken a step forward in peaceful political claims and new ways of participation to an unprecedented dimension in Europe. No matter what you can think, I mean, no matter what you think about the substance of these claims, and I'm not here to discuss that today, one can only acknowledge that there is a remarkable societal phenomenon taking place in Catalonia, and it's very interesting also to see how new forms of participation are emerging all over Europe, not only in my region. In such difficult time for the European Union, and I will end with this, where we are still recovering from a severe, unprecedentedly severe financial, economic and social crisis, but also when we are confronted to a refugee crisis that is essentially a EU crisis, let's face it, that because it has shaken some of the most fundamental pillars and principles of the European project. 1 month before the referendum in the UK, and probably facing a new societal paradigm, and I just referred to that a couple of minutes ago. It is essential, as I said, to reaffirm our commitment to the protection and fulfillment of citizens' rights, but it is also a duty to be outspoken about it. So don't take it for granted, be outspoken about it. So, ladies and gentlemen, I will end here. Let me just welcome you again to this delegation of the government of Catalonia to the European Union. And I wish you a successful conference. It is important, it is very timely. So bring a success to the conference, but be outspoken about it. Thank you very much. And Mr. Georgiev, the floor is yours. Looks better.
Thank you, Amadeo. Welcome, everybody. My name is Petko Georgiev. I'm the chairman of the board of ProInfo, the organization which initiated this series of policy initiatives under the title of EU Impact. And I want to thank the delegation of the government of Catalonia for hosting us here in this perfect location with the great ambience. And I just found out that we Bulgarians, we have something in common with Catalonia. We were also looking at Europe as an inspiration for reform after many years of dictatorship. And now that we see this beam of hope blinking, we are worried as everybody else. So this is why we are here to discuss 24 years of citizenship and what we stand to lose in these 24 years. What was happening during EU Impact, and I'm not going to explain everything because we're going to be talking about it with all the partners from all the different countries, was happening against the backdrop of really very challenging times, to use a very politically correct term about what is happening in Europe in the last couple of years, where freedom has been opposed in a way, or treated from the perspective of security, where European citizen rights, like their freedom of movement and personal data protection, have been challenged by the necessity to make life secure for everybody. In a time when Europe is deeply divided between those who think that European integration is the problem and those who believe that European integration is the solution. So it hasn't been always easy, as you might imagine, bridging those differences and making people think from the same common European citizen perspective about the different issues of their daily lives and their perspectives and their approach towards the implementation of their rights. This is what we are going to be talking about today. I want to thank everybody from our partners and our home-based organization in Brussels, ICAS, for organizing this event. And I'm looking forward to the panels, to the debates, to the discussions which are coming up. Now I have the pleasure to give the floor to Mr. Pavel Tichtl, who is Policy Officer at DG Migration and Home Affairs and is responsible for the Remembrance Trust of Europe for Citizens program. EU Impact is funded under the Europe for Citizens program. He's formerly a director of the European Council of Refugees and Exiles. I would like to invite him to take the floor. Pane Tichtl, vítáme vás.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I didn't expect to be welcome in my native language, so that is always nice. And as you rightly said, I work in the Europe for Citizens program now for many years. I also work with the civil society. And what I do at the moment is I'm responsible for the part of the program that deals with remembrance issues. Okay. And so what I would like to do today, just very briefly, is to maybe take a step back and look, how, when we talk about the citizens' rights and we talk about the citizenship, how does this relate, or how it relates to the European history, to the modern European history. And I have to say, well, I was always interested, I think, coming from the countries like Bulgaria or Czechoslovakia, now the Czech Republic, or, I mean, the history is always there. You can't sort of escape the history. It's not always nice history, it's usually not, it's not very good history, but it's always there. So kind of we have this trauma, you can call it, or we have this obsession with history. But since I started also dealing with the history at the European level, I mean, in a way, you understand how the history in Europe is really not the same, but there are many, well, most of the things that are very similar. And you also start understanding a little bit more your own history. So now I start with the first picture. So, you might say, well, talking about the citizens and citizenship, and why do we have this picture? Well, if you look at this picture, it's a picture of two children. Okay. These two children, this picture is taken in Czechoslovakia, Prague, maybe, or in the countryside, we don't know, in the late 1930s. Yeah? And the children that you see on the picture is Nina, the girl, Lederer, and Petr Lederer. So you can see these are happy children living in Czechoslovakia in the 1930s, not expecting really, what would happen to them in the coming years. When you look at the next picture, you see a painting, yeah? You see a painting by somebody, and if you look really well, I mean, I don't know how your eyes are, but if you look really well, you can see the name on the bottom of the picture. And the name says Nina Ledererova. And you can also see the sign for the second. The second means she's in the second group. Yeah? This picture was made in Theresienstadt in 1940s. The whole family was deported to Theresienstadt in 1942. And education was illegal. Yeah? The Jewish children were not supposed to have any education. They have no rights. They were, beyond the normal community. They were not included. So education was not allowed, but they had to be entertained somehow. So one of the legal activities that they could do was to paint. So there's a remarkable collection of paintings that has survived. It was hidden in the attic of one of the houses in Theresienstadt, and it was found at the end of the war, and it's been published in books and it's been exhibited since. So, and what was also interesting is we cannot do it now today, but we have a film that was made by the family, by the father, their last holidays, 1938 and 1940. So we have the summer of 1938 and 1940, and it's a kind of an idyllic holiday in the Czech countryside. And you see lots of these, lots of these images on the film. So this is what she did, when she was in Theresienstadt, where they were not allowed to leave it, but she still had happy memories of the childhood spent in this kind of idyllic countryside, and she was making these pictures. Then there's another picture made by Nina, which also there are different interpretations what this really is. Some people say it's kind of a self-portrait. This is Nina. Next to her is her little brother Peter. And also, if you watch the film, which is saved on the Washington Memorial Museum, Holocaust Museum, you can see actually, some of these images at the film, some of these sceneries. This was published in a book, but anyway, it doesn't matter. I mean, it just shows you the kind of inner world of a child in the Theresienstadt at the time. And then we have, this is the last picture that we have. And this is a very interesting one. Yeah, well, interesting in comma. It's, again, if you look at the date, you see at the top you see a date. Yeah, it's the 9th of the 5th of 1944. So 9th of May, 1944. Now you see that there's no. It's just black and white. Yeah. So again, we can guess why it's black and white. 44, maybe they had no color paints anymore. Maybe this was done in haste. She didn't have time to finish the painting. And you can also interpret it in a different way. But you see something in the middle which sort of resembles the railway. Yeah. And again, we don't know, is this really a railway? Did she already know? Or, is it just a coincidence? Yeah. And then I show you the last picture, if I may. So we see the last picture, which is 6 days later. Yeah. So this is the transport list to Auschwitz from Theresienstadt. And we see the name of Nina and her family on the list. So 6 days after she made this painting, she was on a train to Auschwitz. And again, we will never know, why the picture looked like it was. We also know what happened to Nina and the family. We know that it happened to many German and Czech Jewish families who, upon arrival, were put in what they call the Familienlager, the family camp, and they kept them until July 44. They were not exterminated immediately because it was the action was focused on the Hungarian Jews. So they were kept until until July 1994, and then there was a selection. We also know that, and there were lots of mothers with children in the family camp, and they had a choice. The younger children could not go to the slave labor. This was towards the end of the war, and the Nazis, they needed slave labor. So they were selecting people who were able to go and slave labor for them, use them as a slave labor. But the younger children couldn't go. So the mothers had a choice, do they go or do they stay with the children? And we know that from many testimonies, and we know, again, it's not, but it seems, or what we know is that there was only one mother who decided she will not stay with her children, and all the other mothers did stay with the children. And so did Nina's and Peter's mother. And Nina, who was already over 13 at that time, or 14 almost, she could be selected for the slave labor, but because the mother decided she stayed with her younger siblings, they all perished. So this is just good. But so this is just a little story, but of course we can tell million and million of these stories. So I think when we talk about the citizenship and the citizens' rights, this is where we come from. I think after this and after these stories, the Europe will never be the same. It cannot be the same. We can never make it better. We can never make it full. We can never make it whole. This will always remain. Hannah Arendt, when she talked about democracy after 1945, she talked about the republicanism of fear. She said, we know what we are able to do, and we create this new democracy as a reminder of as a kind of protection against our worst instincts. But now, dealing with the remembrance and the citizenship, I fear and I feel that this republicanism of fear, or whatever you call it, is being replaced by the republicanism of ignorance. If you forget all this, very often you talk to people and they have no idea, they have no recollection that has happened. The important thing also to say is that this happened not out of context. It was not only the bad, Nazis or whoever that this happened in a midst of society, a normal society. Yeah? If you look further into the story of Nina and Peter, you also have to see that their grandmother comes from a small place in Bohemia, yeah, few thousand inhabitants. What happened in this place at the beginning of the war was that the local Czech fascists, who were quite, I don't know how strong, but they were quite prominent in that place, they organized a kind of a carnival, a parade. So they took the Jews from the part of, there were 200 to 300 Jews. They took them from their part of the town, dressed them as clowns, and they had to parade through the town and play sort of a music, and the rabbi had to, they had a cartwheel that he had to pull, and they put a hunchback, one of the hunchback Jews, on the cartwheel, and they had to. And I talked to one of the old people who live in, who was there at the time. He was 12, 13 at the time, and he said, I went out of the school. This was on the square, and I saw this, and I saw my classmates, my former Jewish classmates, in this. So this couldn't be taken into context, because we talk about Auschwitz. It's a terrible thing. It happened somewhere distant. It happened somewhere far. We sort of have this tendency to externalize this whole thing. It happened. We know it's horrible, but okay, it's behind us. But we see every day we see in many countries very worrying developments. People who would question this, people who would again build walls among communities, people who would question the fundamental rights, people who would question the history, people who would deny that this happened, or they say it happened for legitimate reasons, whatever these could be. They're trying to hide the evidence. So I think, and I will finish here, I think what we need to do, seems to me, from this, is really to have a community of values, to have a collective achievements. I mean, when we talk about rights, it is important, but it's very, to a certain extent, it's limited to the individual. Yeah. But we have to understand that these rights, they come from this. I mean, this is the basis. This is the republicanism of fear. This is where we start, and the rights are a manifestation of our collective achievement, and I would say also our collective awareness, our collective solidarity, and our collective understanding, and our collective audacity, as somebody call it, or courage, to go through this, to face this, to ask. I think, when we start meetings like that, I think we should ask this question: how could this happen? How could this happen in what we call civilized society? Could it happen again? People say it happened once, it could happen again. It will not happen in the same way, it will happen differently. Yeah? So this I would leave as a last closing remark, and wish you all the success with your conference. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you. And I give the floor to Asika Vrakova. She's the director of the European Citizen Action Service here in Brussels. Welcome.
Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the debate today. I think we had a very strong starting point. Thank you for that. I would like specifically also to thank our hosts for the wonderful venue and their hospitality. I would like to thank the Europe for Citizens program, which made it possible today's debate, which is the last of a series of 9-10 debates before that at national level to take place. And last but not least, I would like to thank all the partners for this wonderful experience for over a year under the EU Impact Project. We, as ICAS, as part of this distinguished partnership, had several tasks. We were tasked with the challenge to provide the European perspective to each of the national debates that took place in the member states, and we were also tasked to organize a concluding event, which is today's debate. So when we thought, okay, what exactly should we do? What kind of subject or theme we should select? At the end, we decided to do today's event on the subject of the European citizenship because of 4 main reasons. First, European citizenship is something which is embodied in the ICAS mission and vision. We have been in existence for 25 years, and we have been empowering European citizens how to exercise their rights for this period of time, and also campaigning for a democratic Europe where the European citizenship should be fully tapped. So for us, this topic came in a natural way. ICAS is providing legal advice to more than 22,000 citizens per year who exercise their right of free movement and encounter whatever difficulties. We are also supporting organizers of European citizens initiatives, and those are just few of the things we do. On the second place, we decided that European citizenship will be the right framework also to accommodate all the very diverse and very rich national debates that took place in the member states, which, however, besides their diversity, had two things in common. They were very much focusing on concrete implementation of EU rights at national level, and they were very much dealing with different, more innovative forms of citizens' engagement. So this is why, as you will see, the second and the third panel will reflect very much those sub-issues of European citizenship. A third reason is the fact that this year, 2016, we will be witnessing at the center point, the second part of the year, the new citizenship report. The previous one has been issued in 2013. It ended up with a number of recommendations. So we thought it may be a good opportunity to, in a way, try and check what is the progress in this direction. And last but not least, we have a fourth argument, which I thought I will be the first one to explain, but actually all the previous speakers touched upon it. And it has to do with the fact that living in a challenging situation in Europe, experiencing multiple crises, the effect of which reinforce each other, witnessing populist movements all over, makes us believe that now, more than ever, we have to really recognize what we have at our hands as an everyday achievement out of the European citizenship and not take it for granted. Those of us who have lived a bit longer than the young generation know from life experience that once you take something for granted, you risk losing it the next day. At the personal level, as a woman, I think the men will not most probably dare to share this observation. Usually on a personal level, this is relevant for love. Yeah? You stop paying attention to your partner and he is gone the other day. However, and unfortunately, it also relates to peace and to most of the achievements which form the core of European citizenship. I can talk for hours about free movement, about whether and to what extent it makes sense to restore borders, or to go and have over-exceeding security measures that shrink European fundamental rights and also freedoms. So those are all topics that are very dear to our hearts and that we hope we'll be able to touch upon in today's discussion. And I'm really very optimistic that we'll be able to do so, because here I have a panel of very, very distinguished guests. I want to thank all of them for attending the panel, and I will try very briefly to present them to the extent of how we've decided to invite them, actually, and not exactly because you have their bios. You know. So, first we will have two videos broadcast by two members of the European Parliament, which were not able to physically join us because, and it's totally our fault, we scheduled this event in the Green Week. The Green Week, the MEPs usually go and meet constituencies. But they were so kind as to really address specifically the audience today. Those are Mr. Schöffling, and for those of you that probably know his activities, from our point of view, he's the one who has been the rapporteur for the European Citizens Initiative, and one of really the MEPs who still believe that there is a need for a more thorough revision of the regulation in order to make it work for citizens. The other member of the European Parliament that we will hear from is Mr. Joe Lennon, and he is very much involved with the electoral reform now, and also he's the president of the European Movement, and we, ICAS, are a proud member of the European Movement. I also see here the Director General. Thank you very much for coming and joining us today. Then I would say I'm very lucky to have on my panel Ms. Boulanger. because the way in which I see her, I think she's first the driving force behind the European Citizenship Report. And second, she's one of the guardians of free movement in the European Commission. So very, very happy and thankful for joining us. Then we are also very lucky, I would say, to have Ms. Agnew, who is representing the Ombudsman Office, because in those difficult times for the European citizens and for Europe as a whole, I would say for the first time, as I remember, we have a very, very active and firmly committed to citizenship European Ombudsman. Ms. O'Reilly is not only responding to individual inquiries, but actually she is proactively launching her own inquiries in order to ensure transparency and also to expand the civic space. And I believe we will hear some good examples in this respect. Then I'm also glad that Ms. Hoffman managed to join us today, because Bertelsmann started issuing some very interesting reports. I mean, among other things that you have been doing, those reports actually touch on really the hot issues of today, and also provide statistics and some research and evidence about what Europeans think about those hot issues. For example, I was very, very delighted to see that after the tragic events in Paris, still 79% of the European citizens believe that free movement should be preserved and kept at all price. Last but not least, in order to complete the picture and not only have the institutions or the organized part of the civil society, we have also the unorganized part of the civil society. I think in the face of Mr. Worth, who I would define as opinion influencer in Brussels, with a very, very strong and impressive academic background. So we will be very interested to also hear your point of view. And because I'm a moderator and I have certain responsibilities, I would like to invite my contributors today to stick to actually the time frame that has been allocated to them. And I will take the liberty to show them this 2 minutes before, so that we keep everything on time and we have also time for discussion. Thank you so much. Then, Marta, would you assist me and start with Mr. Shopping? Okay, okay. Whatever is it.
Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to congratulate the European Citizens Action Service for the organization of this highly relevant debate. As president of the European Movement International, in which the European Citizens Action Service is a member, I regret very much that parliamentary businesses prevent me from participating personally in this event. I'm convinced the European Union is much more than just an economic endeavor. We need a Europe for citizens and a Europe of citizens, with citizens actively taking part in European politics. It was a milestone in the process of European unification when the concept of European citizenship was enshrined in the Maastricht Treaty almost a quarter of a century ago. Today, most Europeans are aware that as nationals of a European member state, they are also enjoying the benefits of European citizenship. Unfortunately, for many, the concrete rights and privileges associated with this status remain opaque. While European citizens greatly appreciate the right to move freely in the EU and reside in any EU member state, other rights and instruments, as for example the European Citizens Initiative or the right to consular protection, remain less known. This underlines that we have to increase our efforts to show the benefits of being a European citizen and what will be the loss if Europe fails. Europeans should learn more about the EU already in school, not only in an abstract way, but by showing which practical advantages each individual citizen has being part of Europe. I thus fully support the position of the European Parliament recently took in its report, Learning EU at School, which called for the development and promotion of an EU dimension in education. Citizenship is, of course, closely connected with the right of active democratic participation. In the EU, every citizen has the right to vote and stand as a candidate in European Parliament elections. However, with political debates often being stuck in a national political sphere, we need to improve this most outstanding exercise of European citizenship during the election campaign. The campaigns for the European elections are an opportunity to foster real transnational debates on European topics. As responsible rapporteur of the European Parliament for the reform of the European electoral law, I thus proposed to anchor the nomination of lead candidates by the European party families, to lay ground for a transnational constituency, and to give European political parties more visibility, for example, on ballot papers. The European Parliament endorsed these proposals and passed the reform on the electoral law in November 2015. It is now up to the member states' governments in the Council to show that their calls to strengthen European citizenship are more than a lip service. In these challenging times, it is important to remember the core principles of the EU. Common values, equal rights, non-discrimination, and an active participation in the democratic process are key issues we need to concentrate on. Every citizen should be able to actively make use of all benefits the EU is offering. I'm sure your event will, with representatives from the European institutions and civil society stakeholders, will greatly contribute to further improve the knowledge of Europeans about their rights and privileges associated with European citizenship. I wish you a successful debate and a good outcome of this conference.
Thank you.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person, but I'm in Budapest at the moment. Citizenship, especially European citizenship. In a way, the very word is misleading in this context, because I think most of us, when we think of ourselves as having a citizenship, we associate it with a particular state, or in a few cases, more than one state. You know, you're a French citizen, a Hungarian citizen, a Swedish citizen, or whatever. But the European citizenship is in many ways, well, a kind of derivative of this, so that there are certain rights, certain obligations as well, which are derived from your country, my country, being a member of the European Union. So already you're doing something at one remove. It's much easier to conceive of yourself as being a citizen of a country than of the European Union, because the European Union feels so remote, and actually in many ways it is. And this raises a number of very interesting and actually quite difficult issues. Politically, well, we in Brussels and Strasbourg always talk about the European demos, the European people, who are basically the carriers, the bearers of democracy. Can you have a democracy without a demos? Well, it's a bit tricky, but at the European level, even while, I'm now quoting somebody I've forgotten who once said democracy is Europe's DNA. It's a great line, I wish I thought of it myself. But in fact, it's very difficult for the average European citizen to feel that what they're doing, like voting for people like me, as a matter of fact, is going to make much of an impact on their everyday lives. Now, there are things that we all have as European citizens. We have Schengen, which means that we can by and large go to any European Union country without a passport. I say by and large because the United Kingdom is exempt from this. Or we can settle in any of the 28 countries, again with some marginal exceptions, work there without a special work permit. We have the mobility. But even that is, of course, being questioned in the case of the United Kingdom again, in the context of the referendum to be held on the 23rd of June. There are various other ways in which a European citizenship sort of functions, sort of operates. Now here I'm talking obviously of my own experience as an elected member of the European Parliament. Each and every adult citizen of the European Union, of course, has a vote for the European Parliament, which takes place every 5 years. In every country except one, you have to be over the age of 18. In Austria, it's 16. There are discussions about bringing it down to 16 at the European level, but that's not going to happen very soon. When you've elected an MEP, somebody like me, then in a way it's up to us to ensure that there is contact, that we do talk to the voters, we do talk to the citizens. I certainly have an obligation, obviously, to be in contact with my Hungarian voters. How much of an obligation I have towards Portuguese voters, let's say, hypothetically, or Finnish voters, who are all European citizens, that's a much more difficult issue. Well, I do go to international conferences, international events, and speak and things like that, but it's not really the same as having a direct relationship. And this raises another issue. Can you identify, I think is a better word, with Europe as a political body and your own country? And the answer to that, I think, is extremely difficult. And this is the explanation for what is generally known as the disconnect. The disconnect between what you're voting for and what you feel about it. You don't really feel, most people anyway, don't feel that they have a very strong European identity. There's one exception to this. If you're in non-Europe, you begin to feel very European. Certainly that's my experience. Go to the United States and you'll find that you have much more in common with other Europeans on some issues than you do with Americans. You may all speak the same kind of English, or you may not, but still there's a certain togetherness which you only feel in what I'm calling non-Europe. Now, there's one particular issue that I'd like to explore here. You may or may not know, but I'm very sorry if you don't know, that there is an institution called the European Citizens Initiative. We call this, in European jargon, an instrument. Many things are called instruments, so I'm going to call it an instrument, the ECI, European Citizens Initiative. This was formulated a long way back at the convention, way back, well, best part of 20 years ago, or no, quite as many as that, in the early 2000s. The idea being that in certain circumstances, a given number of citizens come together and they come up with an idea which is then passed to the Commission, and the Commission says, oh, what a brilliant idea. Yes, we'll launch legislation on this. This is the European Citizens Initiative. There are rules. You have to have signatures from 7 countries, and you need at least 1 million signatures to be gathered within 1 year. And indeed, that it should be about something on which the European Commission can initiate legislation. Now, I'm the rapporteur on this in the Constitution Committee of the European Parliament, so I've become an expert on this. Of course, I did know about it before, but I wasn't so intimately involved. And basically, what I've seen is that although the idea is a good one, something like 53 initiatives have been launched. To date, not a single one has been successful. Several have reached their target. They've got the 1 million signatures from the requisite number of countries. The Commission has accepted it, and that's it. It's gathering dust. There's one I have in mind. It's called the right to water, which basically makes it very difficult to privatize water. is quite an important initiative. The Commission is not doing anything about it. Why? Well, when I talk to the Commission, they say things like, well, of course, we recognize how very important the European Citizens Initiative is, but actually it's a young instrument, and it doesn't compel us to do anything. It's advisory. And I suppose, you know, we're thinking about it. Then there are other initiatives. The one I'm thinking of is the Minority Safe Pack, which would guarantee certain rights, certain benefits to members of ethnic minorities speaking another language. It's a linguistic right. Well, that the Commission said no, because the rights of linguistic minorities are member state competence. Well, I wonder about this. If you look at the Treaty of the European Union, the so-called Lisbon Treaty, in Article 2, it quite explicitly says about minority rights, but the Commission chooses to interpret this in a different way. The whole issue has now gone to the Luxembourg court. At the first instance, the Luxembourg court says the Commission is right. I must say I expected the Luxembourg court to say the Commission is not right, but, well, we'll see. There is still another level for that to go. Then there are quite a few ECIs which really never got off the ground very far. That's to say, a group of friends said, let's start an ECI. They don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the money. It's difficult to collect 1 million signatures. And then there are particularities that how do you identify somebody as a citizen? Well, I think there are 28 different ways, which means it's extremely difficult to do this. In my report on the ECI, I suggested that the European Union launch a digital citizenship for all European citizens. Obviously, you know, it's not obligatory, it would be a matter of choice whether you choose to apply for it. Once it's at the European level, of course, it makes it much easier. I can tell you that in Hungary, in order to identify myself, I have to supply my mother's maiden name. I've no idea why this is so. It's an old Hungarian tradition. Maybe it's left over from the Austro-Hungarian period. Who knows these things? They don't have it in Austria, by the way. In Britain, where they don't have identity cards, it's very difficult to identify yourself. So, as I say, the great variety of all the 28 member states. Well, I still have hopes that although so far, by any criterion, the ECI is a failure, that it will be successful, that the Commission will work on it, will recognize its importance, because if not, every time they turn one down, it creates a fair number of Eurosceptics who say, there's no point in this. And I think that the Commission does actually want the contact between the citizens and the European institutions. So, I hope you enjoy the rest of the day. It's goodbye from me.
Dear colleagues, very useful overview of the European Citizen Initiative. Just in case you have missed anything along the lines, now you were able to catch up with. So now it's my pleasure to give the floor to Ms. Boulanger, because we are waiting to hear from her what is the time frame of the issue of the next citizenship report, the upcoming this year, as well as what is the data and the conclusions on which it will be based. Thank you so much.
Good morning, I still try to open my presentation, which seems a bit complex. It does not work. Okay, that's it. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me today. And what I will do today is to present you the findings of the consultation that we have carried out in view of the 2016 EU Citizenship Report. Maybe to anticipate the first question about the timing of the report will be issued this year, but the exact timing has not been defined yet. And this event, and I welcome this very much, is also an opportunity for the Commission to gather feedback in the context of the preparation of this report. Regarding the context of this report, maybe before I should repeat something which has already been said, is what it is European citizenship, and I would like to focus only on the rights which are attached to EU citizenship. The right to free movement has already been mentioned. The right to free movement is subject to condition as defined on the basis of the treaty and secondary legislation. When living in other member states, the right to vote in European and local election, the right to be treated in the same way as national of that country, the right to non-discrimination. Also already mentioned the right to consular protection. We will see this is one of the rights which is less known, which is attached to the concept of EU citizenship. And this is the right when you are abroad to get protection from the consular authorities or from the embassy from another member state on the same condition as the national of that member state. To give a concrete example, if a Czech citizen is in need in China, if there is no representation of the Czech Republic in China, he could also go to the French authorities to get consular protection abroad. Also the right to petition key EU institutions. Now these rights, which are in our treaties, they've been further specified in different pieces of EU legislation. And I would like to mention that because, for instance, on consular protection, there has been just a new directive being adopted last year, and this directive has to be implemented by 2000, within 2 years, to make it simple. And that's very important for the Commission, also as part of the citizenship rights, and it's not that often mentioned. Now, what is this report about? It's a report the Commission issues every 3 years. On the basis of the treaty, we have the duty to report about the implementation of the citizenship right. It is based on Article 25 of the TFEU. And also, we issue a report every 3 years, which basically contains proposal regarding the possibility for citizens to enjoy the EU rights on a daily basis. And this is the EU citizenship report. So there was a report published in 2010, a report published in 2013, to mention the most recent one. And the next report will also report on the implementation of the actions which were mentioned in those reports. Now, how do we go about it, and how do we prepare? We have many sources to prepare the citizenship report. I would concentrate on some of them today. We launched a public consultation last year. We also launched 2 Eurobarometers, one on citizenship rights, one on electoral rights. And I've put some material on the table there where you can find some fact sheet and summary of this public consultation and Eurobarometer's finding. We also organized an hearing with the European Parliament mid-March. There were 4 committees involved, so this attracted a lot of attention in the European Parliament. I recognize some of the people who were at that hearing, some of the speakers too. The Libe committee, the Peti committee, the AFCO committee and the Juri committee were co-organizing this event with the European Commission. Inside the Commission, we have an inter-service group on citizenship, which gather the most concerned Directorate Generals of the Commission. And we have other sources, studies, complaints and requests from citizens. This is quite important because a lot of citizens basically write to the Commission to ask questions or to complain about the exercise of their citizenship rights. Solvit, expert groups that we have in member states. So we have an expert group, for instance, on electoral matters, conference, workshop, direct feedback from stakeholders. So we have many sources. About the public consultation, this public consultation was launched by our Commissioner, Commissioner Jourova, at the Court of Justice in an event organized by the Luxembourg presidency last year. Why in the Court of Justice? Because I'm sure you know that a lot of important development on EU citizenship find their source in the case law of the Court of Justice. So they are very important cases on European citizenship. This consultation was open between mid-September and December. We got more than 2,000 replies, especially from citizens. So the very, very large majority of the respondents were citizens, direct replies from citizens. Rather young people, 56% were under the age of 40. Regarding the nationalities, the largest proportion of respondents were Italians, 14%, closely followed by Brits, Germans, and Greeks, each 11% of the respondents. Regarding the profile of this respondent, the very, very high majority had traveled within the EU at least once, and 60% had lived in another country for at least 3 months. Now, the questionnaire was divided in 2 parts. There were questions about experience, so asking people to describe their experience, and also question about views. Now, the questionnaire, I would call it rather long, a bit bureaucratic, but it really gave the opportunity to people to express their views. There were a lot of possibilities for people to fill open text and really explain about their views. So it's really a qualitative feedback that we got via this questionnaire, which is not exactly the same as the Eurobarometer, where clearly this is something which is more relevant from a statistical point of view, but there were less opportunity for people to give more qualitative feedback. These 2 Eurobarometer were also organized last year. You see on the screen basically more than 26,000 citizens in all EU countries, one especially on EU citizenship and one on electoral rights. What do we see from this Eurobarometer? The first thing we see is that European citizens are more familiar than ever with the status of European citizens. In fact, almost all, 87%, are familiar with the term citizens of the European Union. And they know, and we've heard that in the video already, some comment about this, but they know that they are both citizens of the European Union and citizens of their country, and that they have these 2 citizenship at the same time. And also, almost 80% of the citizens, they know that they don't have to ask to get EU citizenship. So the second thing we see, and it's also a positive development, is that European citizens, they feel better informed about the EU rights. This goes from 36% to 42% in the last Eurobarometer. Something I should have mentioned is that the question in the Eurobarometer are rather similar to the question asked in the previous Eurobarometer, and it's why we can identify some trends. Now, this being said, regarding the feeling of people, regarding the information they have about their rights, we see that there is potential to further increase citizens' awareness and knowledge about their citizenship rights and what they can do, especially if their rights are not respected. 57% still consider they are not informed about what they can do if their rights are not respected. So it's about enforcement of the right. Now, if we take the different rights, the different citizenship rights, we see that there are differences. So obviously, people are more informed about their right to free movement and the right to make a complaint to the European Commission, Parliament, and the European Ombudsman. I still have 2 minutes. And they are less informed about, for instance, the electoral rights and the right to consular protection. Now, regarding the right to vote and stand as candidate in European election, we see improvement in the long term about the awareness, but we note also that the figures have slightly dropped the last years. That's about local election, it's the same trend. Now, regarding the right to consular protection, I insist on this right because this is somehow one of these less known EU citizenship rights. What we see is that people are rather well aware about the right to seek help from an embassy abroad, from another EU embassy abroad, but at the same time, they don't know well what it means. Because we see that, for instance, 75% of the respondents, they wrongly assume that they have this right also inside the EU. So there is clearly work to be done to better inform about this right. Regarding the difficulties regarding the exercise of the rights, we see that basically the situation has improved, but still more than a third of the respondents said that they had met difficulties when moving to other country. Most of the respondents said this was due to lengthy or unclear administrative procedure, 69%, or because they could not find the necessary information or were not sufficiently aware of the right as EU citizen. I just repeat what I said. This shows clearly that we need to pursue our effort. I have to go fast, so I will maybe jump this slide, but I'm happy to develop on this if necessary. Now, regarding the participation and electoral rights, so we see that the majority of the Europeans, they correctly identify the electoral rights in European election and also local election. And when they are asked about what could be done to increase participation in the European election, the people reply, first of all, to better explain the relevance of EU policy for their daily lives, and this we already heard in one of these video messages. Another very important point is to explain the program and the objective of the lead candidates, explain also for the European election as such, so different points. Now, when questions were asked about the specific difficulties in voting in European and local election, you see the figures. The first difficulty is linked to what I would call red tape, administrative burden for registering on the electoral roll. And then you have other replies in the consultation, insufficient and clear information on how to vote. No, I did not mention that, but the participation of mobile EU citizens is something which remains low. If you compare to the general turnout, the participation of mobile EU citizens, so people voting in another member state, that remains low. And it's why we ask all these questions to see how to improve the situation. Insufficient or unclear information regarding registration, so also linked to this information so that people can really know how to exercise their right, lack of information about the right, and also difficulty for disabled people. Now, when asked people what we could do and what should be done to improve the situation, you see different suggestions going from individual letters to automatic registration in the electoral roll. I will go rather quickly until the end, but I would like to go to the end if I can. I go very quickly. We had some question about the source of information regarding political information, EU affairs. You see that clearly internet scores very high. Then there were questions about cross-border access to political information. You see from it that there is a clear interest to get more cross-border coverage of political information. And then it's why I wanted to continue. I would like to come to the last part of this public consultation, which was about EU common value. So there were questions about what we could do and what should be done to promote this EU common value. A common value, those are the values we have in our treaty. They come from our history, as just said by my colleague. This is the fundamental right, democracy, rule of law, also tolerance, respect, very important value. So we had specific question about this common European value and about what should be done to promote them. Then you see an important role for school education, also mobility of young people scores very high, cultural activities. So all these replies about what should be done to promote this European value. This is important feedback we got from this public consultation. Also, something which was mentioned in the replies we received is that the local and regional authorities should play a bigger role in promoting European value. Almost 4 out of 5 respondents pointed to the role of these local authorities. And I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. I think it's a very up-to-date picture about what works, what doesn't work from the perspective of the citizens. And also thank you very much for showing us what the feedback was, because I think this will feed our discussions. We can elaborate after that in the Q&A session a bit more of whether what we have seen as recommendations is really what we think, or maybe we want to add some others. Immediately I go to Ms. Agnew because I'm really curious to see what is the point of view of the Ombudsman Office towards the topic and the subject of today's discussion. Thank you again.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have to say I work for the Ombudsman and I'm immediately going to exercise my right to complain because after all of these excellent presentations, first of all, we have the MEPs. While we're all sitting here, they're all out speaking to real, live, living, breathing citizens. We had Marie-Hélène talking about values. We had yourself invoking the whole idea of love, and immediately people understood what was at stake here. And we had your own really poignant and moving presentation. Thank you so much for the first presentation. I think with your few slides and your few words, you really told us so well why we're here, what we're trying to achieve, and even more importantly, what we're trying to avoid. So thank you so much. And after all of that, I have to talk about the daily grind of administration. So I hope you'll stick with me. But I'm going to start with the story of a father and son, because for me it really resonated when I saw this title of your project, You Impact, from citizen involvement to policy impact. With a single complaint you can change the world, or at least a part of the world, or at least a part of the world that we focus on, which is the EU administration. And this particular complaint came from a father whose son had committed suicide after taking a pharmaceutical product to treat acne. And the father wanted to find out about the drug, basically. So he asked the European Medicines Agency in London for what are called adverse reaction reports. He wanted to find out more about this particular product. And at the time, the Medicines Agency said, well, we're sorry, the EU transparency rules don't apply to these particular reports. And the father came to the Ombudsman, and the Ombudsman carried out an in-depth investigation. And at the end of it, it was the previous Ombudsman told the Medicines Agency that in fact the EU transparency rules do apply to the agency, and they do apply to all of the documents held by the agency, and they do apply to these adverse reaction reports, and therefore these reports should be given to the father. And in the end they were given to the father. And it's just an example of how an individual complaint, basically the overall outcome beyond this single complaint, was that the Medicines Agency recognised that the EU transparency rules do apply to its documents, do apply to its work. And basically this case led to more or less a decade-long discussion between the Ombudsman and the agency, and where the Ombudsman, and now Emily O'Reilly is constantly pushing the agency to move the boundaries when it comes to transparency and access to documents as regards the very important work done by the Medicines Agency. But it's an example of a single complaint really changing things for the general public. I would like to thank ECAS for sending through its policy brief. 24 years of EU citizenship, removing the obstacles to full potential. I picked up 3 themes that I want to talk about. and I'll talk about them from quite a concrete perspective. They're awareness, enforcement, and again, transparency. So on awareness, Marie-Hélène Boulanger talked there about the EU Eurobarometer survey on citizenship. And of particular concern to an institution like the Ombudsman is the finding that 72% of citizens said they did not feel well informed about what to do when their rights are not respected. And this is very important to an institution like ours, which is driven by complaints. If people have a problem with the EU administration, it's important for us that they know that they can turn to the Ombudsman. So what do we do about this? The Ombudsman herself has been meeting with stakeholders, including ECAS, to find out how do people know about the right to complain. I see Christina there. I know you've been working single-handedly within the Commission for many years to inform citizens about their rights. It's good to see you here. But I should also mention, I've been asked by our social media officer to mention a campaign we launched very recently on Twitter under the hashtag #right2complain, right to complain. But one very effective way of informing individuals about the right to complain is at the very moment they get, for example, a negative decision from the EU institutions. It's very good to know about this abstract idea of having an ombudsman, but at the very moment when you get, for example, a negative decision, it should be mentioned what you can do to appeal that or to complain about that. Great progress has been made in the areas of, for example, access to documents, procurement and recruitment, but the Ombudsman, our office, is now writing to all of the EU institutions, bodies, offices and agencies to say, please, if you issue a negative administrative decision to a citizen, to an organisation, to a body, please mention the right to complain. That's a very straightforward and arguably effective way of making sure people know what to do if they have a problem. On enforcement, I note from your report that there are ongoing problems linked to the failure to ensure that EU law is correctly applied throughout the Union and all of the Member States. Just today, the European Ombudsman has launched an inquiry into the EU pilot procedure. I won't ask for a show of hands for how many people know what the EU pilot procedure is, but just to explain, if the Commission is concerned that a Member State is not correctly applying EU law, it can launch what the treaty provides for infringement cases. So in other words, it issues a letter of formal notice and then a reasoned opinion and can eventually bring a case to the court in Luxembourg. But as the name suggests, a letter of formal notice is very formal. The Commission, about a decade ago, introduced a less formal procedure, very wisely, as sort of a dialogue with the Member State to try and bring the Member State into compliance with EU law. We receive a lot of complaints from citizens who write to the Commission to say, I'm concerned about this particular issue in this particular Member State. The Commission then opens a pilot procedure. Sometimes it takes quite a long time. I think the target is 1 year. We have cases that are brought to us that go on for much longer. Sometimes the complainant is not kept informed along the process. And very often the public simply doesn't know that the Commission is looking into this. And this is of major interest to the public. Certain organisations would like to know what particular cases the Commission is pursuing with what particular Member States. So just today, the Ombudsman has published on her website this new strategic inquiry into the EU pilot procedure, and it focuses on timeliness, information to the public and information to the individual complainant. Finally, I haven't even seen the 2 minutes, but I'm preempting you.
I was so fascinated by your presentation, I forgot.
So administration is fascinating, good. On transparency, I just want to say, many people don't know, the first special report that the European Ombudsman issued way back in 1997 was on public access to documents, and it was based on an own initiative inquiry. This led the EU institutions and bodies at the time to adopt voluntarily rules on public access. 2 years later, or 3 years later, when the Charter was proclaimed by the Commission, Council and Parliament, there was a fundamental right in Article 42 on citizens' fundamental right of public access to documents of the Commission, Council and Parliament. And then in 2007, the Charter right was expanded to cover all documents of all EU institutions, bodies, offices and agencies. So I would like to think that the Ombudsman was really at the forefront of that particular wave or improvement in the area of transparency. More recently, the Ombudsman's inquiries have focused more on proactive transparency, so not the right of access, the right to request access to documents, but rather proactive transparency. And here we could talk about the TTIP negotiations, trilogues, clinical trials, lobbying, and in particular tobacco lobbying and transparency in that area. I should mention on trilogues, I know quite a few people are following that inquiry. The Ombudsman expects to publish the responses to the public consultation towards the end of this month and to issue her position on this before the summer break. But we're very pleased with how the inquiry is going in that case and with the cooperation of the institutions. But just as regards this more recent move from the right to request documents to this proactive transparency, the academic Deirdre Curtin has put this more recent activity in the following terms, and I quote, "The institution's impact has been particularly strong on developing the understanding of transparency from a passive citizen's right to access documents to a broad and proactive duty for the institutions to make sure information about its policies and actions are widely available and genuinely accessible. This kind of openness is a cornerstone for enabling participation in the democratic process beyond a mere right to vote in elections." End of quotation. And I really will finish with these two examples of this participation in the democratic life of the Union. I won't say very much about the first. It's the Citizens Initiative that has been touched upon a number of times. But again, the Ombudsman was one of a number of stakeholders who noted the need for better advice, for example, to the organisers of citizens' initiatives, for Parliament to improve public hearings, and for Member States to simplify data requirements, which the MEP mentioned. A more recent example that you may not be aware of is the inquiry we have just opened on the languages used in public consultations. So the Ombudsman tackled this issue a number of years ago and has just opened a new inquiry on it vis-à-vis the Commission. Just last week we noted, for example, a consultation, again available only in English, on the fitness of consumer laws. So the Ombudsman has basically written to the Commission to find out what progress has been made over the past years and what further steps the Commission intends to take, because this is really, it's an essential element of allowing and enabling the citizen to be able to engage meaningfully and effectively in the democratic life of the Union. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Ms. Hoffman, you have the floor immediately.
Yes, thank you very much. I'll really try to be really quick. I feel a little bit, let's say, I don't know, we have now heard so many very concrete cases that I'm almost a little bit sorry that now I'm coming and basically I'm zooming out of the thing and coming to you with research and numbers.
Well, just I'm sorry, the role of the think tank.
Yeah. That's true. But we were just kind of diving deep into it, and now I'm kind of I feel I'm pulling us out of it again. Well, anyhow, as we heard before, those are agitated times, politically speaking. The citizen has finally entered the stage of European politics. And it's emerging in all different kind of cases, as we have had so many brilliant examples this morning already. But we were feeling, as Bertelsmann Foundation, we were feeling that there is a certain lack of general data, of really kind of knowledge, of um, on how Europeans feel, how they position themselves. And of course, there is, for many years, the Eurobarometer, and they are doing brilliant work. But if you compare the availability of data and the quantity of data that is available in the European Union compared to any random national state you could pick, it's fair to say there is very few data out there. And so we saw our chance and we jumped right into it, and we started a series of opinion polls, of surveys basically, that are conducted in the whole of the European Union, so in all member states. And we tried to come up with a better vision of where Europeans stand when it comes to the Union itself and to its politics and to its vision on how to proceed in the future. So, as I told you, those are surveys. We do them basically 3 times a year. They have always a certain structure. There's a certain set of questions about how comfortable you feel with the system of the European Union, so the political system, with democracy, trust issues, but also knowledge issues, name recognition, all those type of things. Then we have a set of personal questions towards how those people, so where they come from, how they're educated, how they position themselves in the political sphere, in their societies, but also how their personal life have evolved over the past 2 years and how they project themselves into the future. And then we have a third set of questions that is concerning like the hard political question of the moment, or if there is none, which is rare, we will define it basically. And we pick a topic we think people should think about more. Just to make it more concrete, we had issued, and I think you were talking about that report we issued in February on asylum and migration policies in Europe, and it turns out that the results we got there were quite astonishing, at least astonishing if you were to compare them to what was voiced coming from the national governments, and what you had the feeling would be the general stand on those kind of issues in Europe at that time. I don't want to drown you in details and data. I know how tiring that is, but there's one main pattern that keeps coming out of the data, and I really would like to talk to you about that. And that is, this pattern has, if you will, a bright side and a dark side. So I'll start with the bright side. The bright side is that whenever we ask about, let's say, principle and potential of the European Union, so when we ask questions that go into the sense of how do you principally generally feel about European integration, how do you generally feel about the European Union, how would you like your country to stay to be a member? How do you feel about the euro? Do you want to keep it as a currency? All those type of questions, we get very positive answers. So on principle and potential, people are with this European Union. So they see the purpose of it and they express it. And it's not one question, it's just a set of questions. The one that's my favorite, and it's very telling if you ask the question, so what's your general attitude towards European integration? Do you think there should be more economic and political integration? Do you think there should be less political and economic integration? Do you think we should basically keep it where we are right now? You get a significant majority of people saying we want more. We think there should be more political and economic integration. That's the term of how we phrase it. So, and when you ask them, so do you think the European Union, what kind of role the European Union should play in the world, you get like 70% of people will tell you we think the European Union should play a bigger role in world affairs. So now we come to the dark side, right? So before you get your spirit, we end up to getting your spirits too high. We turn to the dark side. So whenever you ask them, so well, how do you think things are going? So what's the state of play, basically? And what do you think will happen in the future? Things basically flip, and you get very negative. You get very negative answers. So they don't like what they see right now. They don't think we're doing very good. And to make it even worse, there apparently is no belief that in 10 years' time it will be better. Because we had a set of questions about euro area reform. And there was this one question we asked them to project themselves in the future and say, so what do you think the state of the euro area will be in 10 years' time? And most of those people who answered was not a majority, but it was 42%. So out of the sample, the most answers we get were people saying, well, in 10 years' time, it's basically the same. So that's not very hopeful thought, I think. But to basically finish on a more optimistic note, I think this pattern I played out in the beginning, that is basically, you can translate that in very concrete kind of policy measures and get very kind of encouraging answers. And I come back to the migration and asylum study we did. So we remember, I'd like to just for 1 second take you back in the political situation we had in February. So we had a number of councils. The situation was very dense. We had in early February the Visegrad countries coming out saying there's absolutely no way we're going to join any common action. And when you opened up the papers, you felt that, so this is total deadlock. There is no way we get out of it. And we were looking at our numbers, and people asking people, so how do you like your freedom of movement? Well, maybe no surprise in this room, but there was a large majority of people evidently who said, well, we love the freedom of movement and we want to keep it. So we asked them, so what do you think about common border protection? And they said to a very vast majority, so numbers you hardly ever see, it's between like around 75 and 80%, those numbers, okay. You see people saying, well, we think we should have, we have a common space, we should have common border protection. Then we were asking, so well, how do you feel about the distribution of asylum seekers in the European Union? You remember that was like the hot potato. And we got a large majority saying, well, there's fair distribution. We can go with that, fair distribution of asylum seekers in the European Union. So we ask them, so what do you think is like if a member state basically skips out of a common solution, do you think there should be negative consequences? And most people in the European Union as a whole said yes, there should be negative consequences. So less than, there was not 70%, but there was a majority. So now, of course, we went there, and I'm not going to, and I don't have that much time anymore. But of course, we have also regional samples. So we looked at new member state, old member state. We sometimes look at euro area, non-area, north, south. So we do all that also to get a more detailed picture. And I think the surprise was not that the new member state, and I of course put this in just to make a shortcut, so I hope I don't get anybody offended here, but there were more people like not going with the redistribution, not going with the negative consequences, of course, and they would be crazy to say yes to that. But that was not a big surprise for us. The big surprise was a fair number of people in those countries as well saying, yeah, I think on principle, I think that's a good thing, we should go with it. So what I'm saying is not that the world is perfect and nobody understands, and now I bring those numbers to you. But what is my message to the political sphere is that there is much more room of maneuver to talk to the people and to bring them along. Then apparently there is awareness that there is this room of maneuver. Because right now in the debate we get this, oh my God, don't talk about it because you get everybody offended, and people are against it. And this is it's just not true. So I think what we see is the worst thing you can do right now is to be quiet about these issues, because the other side, I call it the other side, like the Nigel Farages of this world, they're not quiet. And with this pattern I just explained to you, it seems that they have it very well understood, because this is very small phrase Mr. Farage keeps repeating. It's very poisonous. You see, he frequently says, well, the European Union was a good idea, but it just does not work. right? And he basically goes right into that weak spot. We show those type of numbers, and he stirs up all those questions people have. And if we don't have the other side going into the other direction and getting out another message, then this is a very, very dangerous situation indeed. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much indeed. So there is light in the tunnel, and there is a much more room for maneuver if we consult citizens and we also listen to them. Yes? Do you think it's true?
I'll do my best to try to answer that. First of all, thank you very much indeed for the invite, and I'm very happy to be here today. I'm actually on my way to Cologne this afternoon, where I'm running an event for British passport holders in Germany who may be impacted by what happens if Britain leaves the European Union, and therefore would be denied their European Union citizen rights. I've actually been able to be organising events like that all over Germany in the last couple of months, as a kind of disorganized civil society, because essentially the British government is too badly organized itself in order to work out where its citizens actually live. And so we've been mobilizing on social media in order to organize it ourselves. Before I go on to the main points I want to raise, I want to actually reply to some of the comments which were made by Georgi Schöpflin, the member of the European Parliament, in the video. It's a pity he's not here to answer these points, because we can convey them, because I found what he said pretty shameful, frankly. He said that the European Citizens Initiative about right to water was not a success. Well, yes, it wasn't a success because of the type of people in his political party that don't actually want it to be a success. That is the reason why the European Citizens Initiative for Right to Water was not successful, because it was a lefty thing, and he's a member of the European Parliament of a centre-right party. He ought to be honest enough in order to face up to that. That was an ideological reason why that Citizens Initiative was not a success. And second, part of the reason why there's been no proper European Union investigation into the political situation in Hungary is exactly because of Europeanisation, oddly. It's because his party leader, Viktor Orban, sits in the European People's Party, and it's as a result of keeping him in the European People's Party is the reason the European Union institutions have not come down harder on what is the authoritarian take of the Hungarian government. So when he goes on about the fact that the people of Poland or Portugal didn't elect him as a member of the European Parliament, okay, well, we haven't got that aspect of Europeanisation, but what we've got is a nasty behind-the-scenes system of Europeanisation at the highest level of our European political parties. And so essentially, he ought to be careful what he wishes for, Mr. Schöpflin, in terms of the way and means that Europeanisation proceeds. Right then, on to the topics I want to talk about, and there are four main points. First of all, basically, I see my role here as a mobile European citizen who, thanks to my blog, can kind of speak with a megaphone, essentially. I haven't done the calculations for 2015, but I calculated it in 2014. I crossed a land border within Schengen 84 times in 2014. I live in Berlin, I work in Brussels, Copenhagen, St. Gallen, and a bunch of other different places. Freedom of movement matters to me on an everyday basis. I've been in the last week in 5 different European Union member states, for example. I'm a kind of super long distance commuter, if you like, and because I travel by train most of the time, because I'm also a green, that means I'm subjected to border controls where border controls are not actually meant to happen. Most European Union politicians fly places, and Schengen works better if you fly than if you're a poor person and if you take trains or buses. There you get subjected to border controls much more regularly. Bear in mind that crossing European Union borders is an everyday thing for all of us. This is not just some elite thing. There are 770,000 people in the European Union who are cross-border commuters every single day. Slovakia has the biggest percentage of them. France has the biggest absolute number because a lot of French go and work in Luxembourg and in Switzerland. And there are 1.5 million people in the European Union who cross borders daily. Those are people who don't do it on every single day. They are people who take flights or trains for whatever other purposes. So freedom of movement matters to a vast, vast majority of European Union citizens, and it therefore needs to be protected. What I think is very important, this ties in with what Isabel has been saying, is how we collect up what matters to European Union citizens and apply them to the European Union level. So I, together with European Movement, of which Joe Leinen is the president and Petros is the Secretary General, who's sitting here in the audience, we're trying to build a project called Schengen Watch, which is actually trying to use citizens' views on what happens at a border to connect those feelings of what matters to them at the border, people whose school is on the other side of the border, people who trade across the border on an everyday basis, and get that feeling better understood and better known at the European Union level. Oh, another thing about Schöpflin, he also doesn't understand how Schengen works, because Schengen is not actually you are not allowed to travel without your passport or your ID card. You have to take your passport or your ID card. You can't actually just be demanded to show it, which is a rather different thing. So if an MEP in the Constitutional Affairs Committee in the European Parliament doesn't understand Schengen, that's maybe a symptom of the problem. The second issue is not to be discriminated on the basis of nationality. This largely works, and freedom of movement and freedom of right to reside in other European countries is largely understood. But the difficulty comes when you have an issue to do with freedom of, when nationality comes up against residence. So I've had a number of different issues where I've not been able to recharge my British mobile phone because I have a German address. And the British mobile phone company tells me, sorry, we can't check your credit record because you have a German address. This goes the other way round. As an EU citizen, if you want to hire a flat in Berlin, you will not get one initially because you need what in Germany is called a Schufa-Auskunft, a kind of state-organized credit check, and they can't do that on you unless you have a credit record in Germany. As an EU citizen, you haven't got a credit record in Germany, therefore in an initial circumstance, you can't get that credit check. So some of those sorts of things, which are the practical matters that come from EU citizens' rights, don't essentially work. Now, you may have seen on the Twitter screen already, I've been debating some of these sorts of things in light of Mrs. Boulanger's presentation. What do we do as mobile European citizens? We don't, in the end, most of the time, go to European Union institutions to fix those things. We actually mobilize online. So if you need consular protection or your flight is delayed or something like that, we actually network between each other to find ways around the problems, essentially. And equally, in light of what was said by the Ombudsman, if you complain to the European Commission, particularly about Schengen, which I've done multiple times and hassled the European Commission repeatedly, you don't actually get very nice answers. I'm reminded very much of reporting a Schengen breach, indeed in Switzerland, actually, on the border between Austria and Switzerland, Switzerland, a non-EU member state in Schengen. And I was told politely in the letter, and I documented how they demanded my passport and in exactly what form, complained to the European Commission, and the Commission says, we've been told by the Swiss authorities this isn't happening. I was like, sorry, I've just given you evidence that it is, and that's your response back to me. So how the European Commission proceeds with those sorts of complaints could do with some improvement. Third point, electoral rights. I'm one of the very, very few mobile European Union citizens who actually engages in local party politics. I am candidate number 38 on the list for the Bezirksverordnetenversammlung, that's the local council of Friedrichshain-Kreuzberg in Berlin for the Greens. I am one of a handful, I know 4 others, EU citizens in the entirety of Berlin who are non-German citizens who are active in the Green Party. I like what Joe Leinen says about transnational lists in the, at European Union level, but actually 94 out of 96 members of the European Parliament representing Germany were born in Germany. One is French, moved to Germany in 1975, Evelyn Gebhardt, and never left, and the 96 happened to be born in Palma de Mallorca of German parents. Europeanization of our political parties does not just have to happen at European Union level with transnational lists. It has to happen at the local level, because one of the reasons many EU citizens in Berlin, in my experience, do not know what their electoral rights are is because the welcome for EU citizens in Berlin is catastrophically awful. No one makes any effort to explain to us what our rights actually are because the local authority, the Bürgeramt of Friedrichshain-Kreuzberg, is catastrophically badly organized. Now, if no EU citizens get involved in local party politics in order to manage to improve how that local authority improves the welcome for European Union citizens, then that's not going to improve. Joe Leinen's Europe-wide lists are not going to improve it. We've got to Europeanize political parties from below. And if you look at the statistics of how low not only electoral participation is, but how low numbers of European Union citizens running for office or even party political membership, those things are really chronic. And at the moment, as a British citizen, for example, I have no right to vote in a regional election anywhere. I cannot vote for the regional elections for the Land of Berlin because Germany prevents me doing that, and I cannot do it in London because where I'm registered as a UK citizen, because the UK doesn't give overseas voters the right to vote in regional elections. So I'm disenfranchised at the regional election in the country where I live and the country of my passport. So drawing all of that together, my final point is essentially about the rhetoric. EU freedom of movement is essentially a right. There is an important difference between a right and having to ask for something. I am a self-employed person. I do not want to have to go to the Bürgeramt in Berlin to demand the right to stay in the case that Britain leaves the European Union. People go, yes, people have always moved. No, we have not always had the right to move. And there is an important difference there. Look at the situation in the UK, and my final point. 1.5 million of the 2.3 million EU citizens who don't have British passports and live in the UK are aged in the bracket 18 to 35. Many of them are students, many of them are in a first job. If you reimpose a visa or some need for a right to remain to those people in the UK, you are going to disenfranchise an enormous bunch of essentially normal people, people who are not immensely privileged. We essentially have to get away from this notion that essentially that crossing borders, going living in another European Union country, is something only essentially for a kind of privileged middle class. These are people who are escaping economic poverty and trying to make a better life for themselves, and therefore they need as much backing and as much protection in doing so as possible. I will stop there. There are plenty of other points, but that's enough because I'm out of time.
Thank you. So I think the panel kicked off the discussion quite well. We are, as usually, out of time, but what I would suggest we do is that we take up to 5 comments or questions as far as they are not longer than a minute and a half, and then we give the floor to the panelists to respond, and then we continue the discussion over lunch informally. Would this be acceptable for the audience? Okay, so please present yourself and be very, very brief and strictly to the point. Who would like to pose a question? Please, madam.
Do I have to stand up?
You can sit if you want, but we have to give you a microphone, yes?
Okay. Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon. My name is Frances Sonington. I'm from the Citizens Information Service, Dublin. I just have a comment, and I'm sorry I forgot your name, but your presentation is the way to go, because when you use pictures and make your presentations, it's nearly impossible for anyone not to understand, and it's also impossible for people to forget, because nobody wants to go down that route again. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Would you please say what Citizens Advice Bureaus does? Because you do a very important job and I know about it, but I don't know whether the audience knows. Just with one sentence.
Okay. The Citizens Information Service is a network of 42 centers in Ireland, and we also have the Information Service. It's a place or an avenue to get your rights, your entitlements, and to seek redress if there are issues that you have with assessing any social or political or housing needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we have to move the mic there. No, because we are web streaming, so it's important that also people that are not physically in this room here.
Hi, I found the presentations very interesting. The intervention very varied and straight to the point. I'm quite interested in terms of the data you presented in terms of EU citizens reporting issues, administrative issues, and whether that could be further broken down, and whether there's any issue in terms of asserting certain right and having to go through, let's say, tribunal procedures, if this is included in terms of administrative barriers, if it can be broken down so we can understand.
Okay. Thank you. And can you present yourself, please?
Oh, sorry. I'm Samia Badani. I'm the Director of Campaigns and New Europeans. I'm also a policy and advocacy consultant. I've been with the Citizens Advice Bureau in the UK for 10 years. I've been different places.
Okay. Anyone else having a pending question?
Since we have 3.
Thank you for filling in the quota.
Well, I'm just a, so to say, citizen That's not totally correct and not a big community, but I'm working in the youth program, and I wanted to fill John Worth. My name is Burkhard Harsch. I'm from Germany, from north of Hamburg. I wanted to fill in the difference in the law of Britain. You will be at least told your rights sometimes. In Germany, it's more we keep our rights, and you have to inform yourself to find out what your rights are. This is the standard of administration. If you don't know your rights, you still, but this is the habit, no, this is what you told us here, and I think it's correct in Germany. It is also not good. That's only what I wanted to say.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, then in this case, I will give the panelists just for concluding remarks, like half a minute. Ms. Boulanger, can you break based on the data that you have a bit more what the situation with rights and is it feasible or not?
So I can give some additional information, and there is this brochure that I can give to you where you find all the detailed information about the public consultation and also the Eurobarometers. All the findings are published on the Commission website. So for all the detail you find them there. But maybe just to give a bit more detail about this, as I mentioned, most of the respondents regarding mobile EU citizens, they said that difficulties were due to lengthy or unclear administrative procedure, so 69%, or because they could not find the necessary information or were not sufficiently aware of their right as EU citizens. That's 51%. And then we have, and you find it also in the brochure I've just mentioned, we have asked people to distinguish between when they are planning to move and the difficulty they encountered and how they see the situation, and other element when settling in another country. So for planning to move, more than 80% of the respondents, they consider that online information on practical issue in the country of destination would be most useful. For instance, information on how to register as a resident, information about electoral rolls, or to enroll at school, or to register a car. That's one category. Another figure is that 73% consider that administrative e-services, including possibility to fill in administrative forms online, would help those planning to move. And 56% called for more cooperation between the authority of the country of origin and the country of destination. Now, when asked about what could help you to settle in the new country, 87%, so very high figure, say that assistance via one-stop shop portals, I think that's already been mentioned in the discussion, would be very important. Another interesting finding is that 49% consider that policy to promote intercultural dialogue, mutual understanding and inclusion would be also important. And all the detail, I don't want to be too long, are in the brochure, but we can speak over lunch.
Thank you very much. Your concluding word, maybe, if you want to, I don't know, underline anything, although there wasn't a specific question.
I would just comment on the final two presentations that came after me. I mean, for me, this really covered the two extremities in terms of really what you mentioned, Isabel, that what's possibly missing is leadership, that the citizen is not as cynical as one might be led to believe, and what's required sometimes is leadership to verbalise that and to bring ideas and to bring solutions, but to trust the citizen, I think. And then, John, you simply gave us all the practicalities, on the ground, the difficulties that people face, and I think that's there, as I said, on the one hand the visionary leadership, and on the other hand the daily practicalities that we need to address. I think it was really fascinating. Thank you.
I'd just like to reply to that point about rights and responsibilities. If we look at the statistics that Mrs. Boulanger has presented, when you move to a new place, you need to be reached proactively by that country. Just going, Germany does that differently than the UK, then does it differently to Denmark or whatever. That's not enough. Sorry. And indeed, actually, parts of Germany do it well. Hamburg and Dusseldorf, most notably, for example. Berlin doesn't, as a result of a number of different things. The situation as such is, what then happens is if only those that have been schooled by the German education system, or the British education system, or whatever other country's natural education system, you have to know how to go about getting those rights, which is related to having been born and brought up there. That acts as a barrier to integration. That leads to political institutions that are not as representative as they should be. When political institutions are not as representative as they should be, then problems ensue. People do not see themselves reflected in those political institutions. They opt out, they move towards extremist parties, they feel that they are not part of a political system. So just going, well, you can inform yourself. Well, have you tried, right? I speak bloody good German. To try to work out how the Volksbegehren process works in Germany, right? Volksbegehren, Volksentscheid, to work out how you have the right to initiate a citizens' initiative within Germany. You bloody need kind of basically an understanding of German law that is above and beyond what any normal person would be able to do, German or otherwise, right? I am not tolerating that as a reason for non-engagement, right? You have to, as a public authority in Germany, UK, anywhere else, go out of your way to make that information as digestible as possible, first of all, and go in as far as you can, proactively try to engage those people. The Bezirksamt knows where I live, knows my taxation number, can inform me of things if and when it could decide to do so. I would highly recommend any European city, and I had a pretty difficult time in Copenhagen for a number of different reasons, but Copenhagen's welcome for European Union citizens when you move there is exemplary. There is an office that welcomes you, there is an office that explains to you how to go through the whole process, and you have a person you can go to with whatever the questions are in order to manage to integrate for your political rights, registering a business, how to get yourself sorted out in the healthcare service, these kind of things. And it is super. If any other European country could manage to replicate that type of system in the way that Copenhagen municipality does, we'd all be in a much better spot in order to manage to make sure that European Union citizens knew what their rights were.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, this is for now before the lunch. We are going to have a lunch break over there for 45 minutes. So we are going to start the next panel at 1:15 sharp. I would like to thank my panelists very much because I think we've managed to have a very interesting discussion and presentation. Thank you once again.